These days, I always carry a small torch in my pocket. I found a compact LED one at an electronics store for just a few bucks, and it's surprisingly bright despite its size. I actually bought 5 of them. The other 4 are placed in key spots around my house so I can grab one quickly if needed. I refuse to be caught in the dark again. It's bad enough seeing her whenever I close my eyes. I don't think I could handle seeing her with my eyes open. But let me start from the beginning. I used to work in an office building in town, handling public counter services for a government department I won't name. The job was straightforward: processing applications, answering questions about our services, and helping the public. My colleagues were great, and the work itself was nothing out of the ordinary. The building, on the other hand, was a bit unusual. From the outside, it looked like any other office building, 12 stories tall, simple and boxy, with flat sides. It wasn't flashy, just a plain structure like so many others in the city. However, it was older than the neighboring buildings, probably built in the 1980s. There were minor issues, drafts here and there, and the lights would flicker sometimes, but nothing major. The elevators were another story. There were 4 of them, and at least one always seemed to be out of order. They'd fix one, and another would break. The doors sometimes slammed shut without warning, and the lifts occasionally jolted or dropped slightly as you stepped in. It was unsettling, but not serious enough for the building's owners to make any real changes. I never liked those elevators, so I often took the stairs. The building had 2 stairwells, one on each side. They were narrow, so if someone was coming the opposite way, you had to wait in the landing area or squeeze past. During fire alarms or evacuations, they got crowded, but I worked on the 3rd floor, so it wasn't too bad to go up or down. The stairwells were plain, windowless cement walls with dim yellow lights, probably cheap energy-saving bulbs. Each stairwell had bathrooms on every level, one for men and one for women. After a Peeping Tom incident in the women's restroom, the building managers installed combination locks on the doors. Only employees with the right code could use them, and each floor had a different combination. You couldn't go up or down a level to use another floor's restroom. Since our department was a part of the government, security was a priority. We also had swipe cards to access the office from the reception area and the stairwells. To get back into the stairwell or return to the office, you had to use your card or press a release button. It's hard to pinpoint when things started to feel off. It wasn't an abrupt change, more like a gradual shift. You've probably heard that analogy about boiling a frog. If you put a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out immediately. But if you heat the water slowly, it won't notice and will boil to death. That's how it felt. If everything had gone wrong all at once, I'd have left immediately. But the changes crept in slowly, too subtle at first to notice. The first odd thing I remember happened in the men's restroom. There weren't many guys in our office, so I often had the place to myself. One day, I walked through the reception area to the stairwell, pressed the button to unlock the door, and stepped in. As I entered the restroom and the stairwell door closed behind me, I got this weird chill down my spine. Suddenly, everything went eerily silent. Normally you could hear muffled sounds from the waiting room or the radio, but this time, it was completely quiet. It felt unnatural. I didn't dwell on it at the time, but it made me hurry. I did what I needed to do and got out quickly. As soon as I stepped back into the bright, noisy reception area, the unease vanished. For the next few days, maybe even weeks, everything felt normal again. I can't recall the exact timeline because what happened unfolded over a fairly long period. It started with small, subtle things. I'd feel the occasional cold draft or a shiver would run down my spine, like the sensation of being watched. But I brushed it off as stress and continued with my routine. As I mentioned earlier, I had a good relationship with my co-workers and boss. Most of us were in our mid-20s, and we often went out for drinks on Fridays after work to relax and unwind. One Friday, after we'd closed the public counter for the day and finished dealing with customers, we were packing up and getting ready to head out. I excused myself to use the men's room before leaving. When I opened the stairwell door, I noticed it was dimmer than usual. The light above the stairs to the next floor had gone out. As I turned to punch in the code for the bathroom door, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. At the top of the stairs, in the dim light, something moved. I can't describe it in detail, just a dark shape. It was there for a split second, darting across my line of sight, fast, impossibly fast, from one door to the next. It vanished around the corner before I could fully register what I'd seen. The shape wasn't blurry or distorted, and it moved in a quick scuttling motion that sent a chill down my spine. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the dimness, unable to move. I don't know how long I stood there, but I was completely paralyzed with fear. Then a hand landed on my shoulder. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Daniel, what are you doing, man?" It was my boss, coming to check what was taking so long. "There was something," I stammered, trying to explain what I'd seen. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "What was it?" I turned to look up the stairs again, but the dimness seemed less intense now. "Nothing," I said, shaking my head. "Must have been a trick of the light. I really need to get my eyes checked." "Then let's get out of here and grab some drinks," he said with a laugh. Later that evening, surrounded by my colleagues at the bar, the warmth and laughter made everything feel normal again. The memory of what I'd seen faded into the background. If I'd known what was coming though, I might not have been so quick to relax. For a while after that, things seemed fine. I went back to work on Monday, got through my tasks, and tried to forget the unsettling moment in the stairwell. I even took advantage of the department's offer to cover eye exams and got my vision checked. The optometrist said my eyes hadn't changed in years, though it was time for a new pair of glasses. About a month later, another strange incident happened. I was heading to the gym after work and needed to change into my gym clothes. Since the public counter was closed and most of the lights were off, I used the public bathroom near the waiting area. The space was dimly lit but bright enough to see. I put in my earbuds, cranked up my MP3 player, and started getting in the zone for my run. That's when I heard it, screaming. It was female, loud, and raw, like it came from a throat torn with razor blades. The sound was both deafeningly close and oddly distant at the same time. I yanked out my earbuds, unlocked the door, and rushed out into the waiting room, expecting to see someone in danger. The room was completely empty. Not a single person was there. I stood frozen, scanning the space and straining to hear or see anything. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned back toward the bathroom. In the mirror, I saw my reflection and something dark looming over my shoulder. I spun around immediately, bracing for whatever was there. But there was nothing. I looked back at the mirror, but the dark figure I'd seen a second ago was gone. I grabbed my access cards, swiped them to unlock the door to the back office, and hurried inside. My boss was there, sitting at his desk, packing up for the day. "Did you hear that?" I half yelled, my voice shaky. He looked up confused. "Hear what?" "I heard someone screaming," I replied, my chest still tight from the rush of adrenaline. He stood up quickly, and we both walked into the waiting room, ears straining for any sound. After a minute, he turned to me with a concerned expression. "I didn't hear anything, Dan," he said, his brow furrowed. "Are you okay? You've seemed a little off lately." To his credit, my boss was genuinely worried. He was the kind of manager who truly cared about his team. "If you need some time off, just let me know. You've got plenty of leave saved up," he offered. I'm not sure," I said hesitantly. "I'll let you know." I turned and headed for the elevators, the sense of dread hanging over me like a storm cloud. What was I seeing? What was I hearing? And how could I stop it? If all of these things had happened at once, I probably would have quit on the spot. But for some reason, I convinced myself to stick it out. Maybe I thought it would stop. Maybe I was just stubborn. In hindsight, I wish I'd made a different choice. Things only got worse from there. Walking through certain parts of the office gave me chills, and sometimes I felt the same at my desk. I filed maintenance requests to check the air conditioning, but they found nothing wrong. The lights above my desk flickered, no matter how many times the bulbs were replaced. I started seeing shadows moving in the corners of my vision, but every time I turned to look, nothing was there. My health began to suffer. I was constantly on edge, exhausted, and losing weight. My co-workers started noticing the change in me. I wasn't sleeping well, haunted by nightmares of shadows lurking just out of sight. I even started leaving the lights on at home because the thought of waking up in darkness terrified me. As I grew weaker from stress and exhaustion, whatever was tormenting me seemed to grow stronger. I began to notice more details in the darkness, like long, stringy black hair. It was never clear enough to describe fully, but just thinking about it sent shivers down my spine. A few times, I felt ice-cold fingers graze my shoulder, but when I turned around, no one was there. I thought about quitting several times, but didn't. Maybe it was pride, or maybe I wanted to prove I wasn't afraid. I also wanted to know why it was targeting me. No one else seemed to experience anything strange, and my co-workers couldn't understand why I was so uneasy about being alone in the office. I tried digging into the building's history, but nothing came up. No tragedies, no deaths, nothing unusual. It didn't make any sense. Then, as the Christmas season approached, everything reached a breaking point. Our office had a tradition of taking a group photo every year. We'd dress up, pose for a professional photo, and then hang the framed picture in the back office. This year, though, the photo wasn't hung up. The day of the photo shoot was normal. We lined up, smiled for the camera, and got on with our work. A week later, I walked into the office one morning to find my co-workers gathered around my boss's desk, staring at something. When I entered, everyone turned to look at me at the same time. Their faces were a mix of confusion, concern, and fear. Without saying a word, they dispersed, leaving me alone with my boss. On his desk was the A3 size team photo. He gestured for me to take a look. I found myself quickly. I had been sitting in the front row, but when I saw my face, I froze. "What's going on with this, Dan?" my boss asked, his voice unsteady. In the photo, my face was distorted, like looking at a reflection in a warped mirror. My smile stretched unnaturally wide, and my eyes looked wild, almost crazed. It was horrifying, but that wasn't the worst part. Behind me, there was a dark figure looming over my shoulder. It wasn't detailed, just a shadowy shape, but its presence was menacing, almost evil. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I stared at it. "I have no idea," I said, trying to sound calm. "Maybe it's a problem with the camera lens." I considered telling him the truth, explaining what had been happening to me. But I didn't want to sound like a lunatic. No one would believe me anyway. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I wasn't already the crazy guy. The photo was thrown in the trash. The next day, my boss reassigned me to a different part of the office. The banking room. For security, the banking room was windowless and fully enclosed, accessible only through a swipe card. Once inside, the doors locked magnetically, and you had to press a button on the wall to unlock them to get out. My boss thought being away from the main office would help me, and had even scheduled a counseling session for me through work. An hour into my shift, the room suddenly felt cold. I glanced at the thermostat, but it hadn't changed. Then, the lights began flickering, on and off, over and over. I spun around in my chair, searching for an explanation, but finding nothing. When I turned back toward my desk, my heart stopped. A dark figure was crouched on the desk. I recoiled in shock, pushing my chair back so hard that I slammed into the shelves lining the wall. I fell to the floor, trembling. For the first time, I could see details in the shadowy figure. The lights flickered, and for brief moments, when the room dimmed, it became clearer before fading when the lights returned. It was the figure of a girl, or at least something resembling one. She looked like she could be anywhere between 16 and 50 years old. Crouched on my desk with her knees pulled up near her face, hands flat on the surface. Her long, stringy hair hung over her features. At first, it seemed like she wasn't looking at me, but then her head turned, slowly, unnervingly, and her eyes met mine. Those eyes. They were entirely black, with different shades marking where the whites, irises, and pupils should have been. They were full of madness, hatred, and an unsettling hunger, like she desperately wanted something just out of reach. A tear slid down my cheek as I stared at her in horror. With each flicker of the light, she seemed to grow more real, more solid, feeding off the darkness and my fear. Her grin stretched wider and wider, her black eyes gleaming with malice. Then she opened her mouth, revealing sharp, jagged teeth. She looked like she wanted to speak, but all that came out was a low, guttural growl, like nails scraping a chalkboard. I wanted to scream, but my throat betrayed me. All I managed was a weak, frightened whimper. Keeping my eyes locked on her, I struggled to stand. I didn't dare look away. If I did, I knew she'd strike. I had seen how quickly she could move in the dark. Pressing myself against the wall, I inched toward the door. Her head tilted slightly, almost as if she was curious about what I was doing. I reached behind me, searching for the button to unlock the door, my fingers fumbling over the wall. Then I accidentally hit the light switch. The room plunged into total darkness. I froze as hot, foul breath hit the back of my neck. The stench of decay, rot, and hunger surrounded me. Mine. Now. The words were a harsh whisper. Despite my protests, no one believed me. Eventually, the wounds healed, leaving scars. My boss, being the kind man he was, transferred me to a different department in a new, well-lit building. I kept in touch with a few former co-workers, though some now saw me as a bit of a freak. I didn't blame them. Since that day, I've made it a point to never be in complete darkness. I stay in bright rooms or out in the sunlight as much as possible. She can't get me in the light, but I know she's waiting. If she ever manages to finish me off, I think she'll become strong enough to leave the darkness entirely. So, no, it's not the dark itself that terrifies me. It's what's hiding in it, watching and waiting. I believe she came from somewhere beyond, a place behind the darkness, and somehow I let her in.